Um, Hello, everybody. This is John with the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. My gamer tag is WrestleUp, as it says below, and this is our normal weekly live stream where we speak with different people in the gaming industry and try to play various games as well. This week we have Chris from PixelNAUTS.
Hi there.
Chris, for anyone that does not know who you are, could you describe a little bit about your background and how you got into games?
Yeah, sure. I actually kind of got into games development school kind of as a last minute decision. I was actually going to go into an engineering program, and I had a friend who went into a digital media arts program, and I kind of found out about it at the last minute and said to him, like, I don't know, that doesn't really seem like a real career to me. Like, I don't know if there's a lot out there for something like that. And he's like, Are you kidding? There's tons of stuff out there. It's like really valid career. And back then there weren't a lot of programs for things like that. And so I kind of made a last minute decision to apply for that as well. And it turned out to be the one program that I didn't get into out of all the ones I applied to.
Mm.
And I decided to kind of wait for a semester and reapply and get into digital media, and it kind of went from there. So that was kind of my start into games.
Hmm.
Going back to when I was a kid, I always loved playing around with games. I used to always wait for my dad to bring home new computers and play around with whatever was new on it. And I remember spending a lot of time messing around with QBasic. We were playing this game, Gorillas.Bass,
Mm.
when I was a little kid, and I used to love just messing around with the weapons so I could try and like beat my dad at it. It was just this stupid artillery game where these two gorillas stood on top of like skyscrapers and lobbed nuclear bananas at each other.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was a great time, and so I kind of had this obsession with games from a young age. Made some games in high school, and then ended up going to school for it.
That's awesome. And I see that you worked both. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did you work in the bigger publisher space before you became an indie developer?
Yeah, I did. So I did, like I said, my digital media arts diploma,
Hmm.
and then after that, I did a post grad certificate in games development. And from there, I got into AAA games doing motion capture cleanup.
Hmm.
So I worked in a little studio. The school that I went to had a motion capture facility, and so I did cleanup after I graduated for about 6 months. And I ended up doing some motion capture cleanup for Silicon Knights for their game Two Human.
Hmm.
And from there, I ended up getting hired there as a background artist. Alex was already working there, and he put in a good word for me. And yeah, so I got hired on to work at SK4 Two Human.
That's awesome.
So I stayed there for, I think it was about 4 years. Alex was there for about four and a half. And we worked on Two Human. Like I said, when I got there, they were about a year and a half into development. So we're about a year to a year and a half before release. Um, and so I was probably one of the last people that got hired on that team. And we did that, and then we did Darksiders, and we also worked on X-Men Destiny
Mm.
before we left.
And what was your decision to move into the indie space after working in the big publisher space?
Okay, so when we were working at Silicon Knights, pretty much everybody in the company had a dev kit, and there was this company-wide mandate that um, if you were testing your stuff, you had to test it on the dev kit, just because they wanted to make sure that things weren't just um, working on a computer, but they were actually working on the kits.
Hmm.
And so we had access to the Xbox Developer Network, which gives you access to all the new Xbox Live Arcade games that came out. And at the time, that was kind of a new space. There weren't a lot of things on it. And I really think that Microsoft kind of pioneered a lot of that stuff.
Mm.
Of course, there's Steam as well, but for the console space, like downloadable titles was kind of a new thing. And so we got to try out all these new little games that popped up. And one of the big ones for us was Bomberman Live.
Mm.
But there were tons, like Trials, um, Explosion Man, um, Geo Wars, like all these little tiny games that were really creative, kind of like couch co-op games. And we would spend, all of our lunches and all of our after work time just kind of competing at these little games.
Mm.
And I thought it was like a really interesting space. It was kind of cool that a developer could make something for, in the $10 range or $15 range, self-publish and be able to survive off that. So kind of got obsessed with the idea of having a small team and being able to have full control over what you're doing. One of the things that's really hard with AAA games development is there's just so many people that it's hard to have control over what you're doing because it's such a broad-based pyramid. So there'd be times where I'd be frustrated with what we were working on, and I thought that I could make a positive impact, but it's just that, realistically, you can't take everybody's ideas into account when you're making a game that big. Somebody has to be driving the ship, right?
Mm.
So we ended up leaving just because we wanted to have, if we were going to be spending late nights and whatnot, we wanted to have more control over what we were doing, and we wanted to have like shorter turnaround time, and make more bets, but smaller bets. Found like a lot of people in that space were spending 4 years making a game, 15 to $30 million at the time for a AAA game, and in some cases they'd be canceled, right before they came out, or even earlier.
Mm.
But there were friends that I had there that worked at Silicon Knights for 5 years and had nothing on their resume when they left because all the games that they worked on got canceled.
Mm.
We were very lucky that all of our games actually shipped. But yeah, it was kind of a harsh environment, so we just wanted to try something smaller.
Very cool. And then one of your products right now is on the stream, Lost Orbit. We'll be talking a bit about that and a couple things before we continue. Number one, if anyone has any questions, type it into the chat. We'll bring it into the stream as we're going along. Number two, you can actually win a copy of Lost Orbit thanks to PixelNAUTS. We have a couple of Steam codes, so all you need to type in is #win, and we'll choose a couple of winners before the end of the stream. So please do engage with us. We'll be looking at this the Twitch chat throughout the whole stream. So, and I'll be attempting to play this game as we're talking, which is a feat in itself. So. Lost Orbit. This is a very interesting game to me. I was reading about it, and I believe in an interview, someone on your team called it instead of a shoot 'em up, they called it a dodge 'em up or something like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, early on we kind of had a difficult time explaining it to people, and at some point we came up with this term dodge 'em up, which although we arrived at it independently, apparently is a subgenre, and a lot of people have used it before us. But yeah, like I got annoyed when people would come up, and not annoyed, but I got tired of disappointing people when they came up. They're like, "Oh, I love twin stick shooters," and I'm like, "Yeah, there's not really any guns. It's just kind of a dodging game," and they'd be like, "Oh, okay." So it's like we're searching for this term that could explain the game really clearly, really easily, and I think dodge 'em up Death Simulator is probably the best we've come up with.
Dodge 'em up Death Simulator. Interesting. And so obviously one of the inspirations, I guess, is a shoot 'em up in the genre.
Yeah, we just like the fluid movements of games like that, and so that was something that we definitely went for in the design of the game.
What other inspirations did you take upon making the game, out of curiosity?
There were a lot, actually. So one of the big games for me was this tiny little game called Gravitational Combat that I used to play with my brother-in-law, and it's a traditional artillery game, except for the fact that it takes place in space, and you can use the gravitational pull of planets to kind of arc your shots. And so you can play it kind of straightforward like an artillery game, just with multiple gravity points. But my brother-in-law and I used to sit there and we'd make rules like, okay, you need to arc around, or you need to orbit around 3 planets before it's a valid hit to kill the other guy. And just make it more difficult for ourselves. And I got really kind of enamored with the mechanic of like flowing from gravity well to gravity well. So that was one for sure. The next one was I really liked that game company's game Flow. And I spent a lot of time playing with it. If you haven't played it before, you're kind of a microorganism, and you're just trying to eat other microorganisms and descend to lower levels where you can fight larger ones and get bigger and grow. And I was just kind of, I liked the feeling, like the elegance of it all, how you just kind of like swam around really gracefully, and how such a simple mechanic could be that interesting. And so that was definitely one of the inspirations for the gracefulness of the game and like the flow of everything in the game. And then on top of that, kind of like we were really obsessed with with movies like Starship Troopers and Total Recall, Paul Verhoeven movies that have kind of like a bleak outlook on the future, where human life is not really that important or valuable, and newscasts are kind of all sarcastic and I don't know, twisted. And so it was kind of a mix of all those things, where we had this story about this guy who's got very little value to his society, struggling to survive amidst a really harsh world.
I can tell that. I can see that. And the dialogue and the story is also very interesting to me as well. Did that come as a process of the gameplay forming, and how did that all come about?
So I remember back when we were working on Two Human, a lot of game developers were talking about story in games and how story was the next big thing, and putting all this effort into it. And I just remember feeling disappointed with a lot of the games that I was playing that had that kind of had made that attempt. And then I remember downloading Portal, getting to work early, downloading it, and firing it up for the first time. And I was amazed by how much story they got out of a situation where there's really no characters. I mean, there's like one character that's talking to you, but she can paint the picture of like everything that's happening, and even tell you a little bit about yourself without you ever speaking. And so I took it as a lesson that, like, anybody who's talking about making story in games, you have to look at this as kind of like a game changer, and they really nailed it. And so when we made this game, we're like, yeah, it's a small game. It's just kind of like an action game, but there's no reason why a small game can't have a story. And since we were on a very limited budget, we're just like, well, we don't have to put a ton into it. We don't want to have like 50 characters and like, Metal Gear Solid like cinematics, but we can do a narrator. We can do a little bit. And it just kind of grew from there. I really like the narration in Shawshank Redemption. And so that was kind of like an inspiration, and we were just doing like little bits of dialogue here and there, and it just kind of grew from there. People really liked it, so before we knew it, we had a pretty long script. And
No, there is a surprising amount of dialogue. I was surprised to have the narrator and learn who the narrator was eventually. It was all a very interesting process in general to me.
Cool, I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah. Out of curiosity as well, as I'm going through the game a little bit, I haven't finished it, but what are some of the biggest challenges you faced that you came across as developing the game and after you developed the game?
After we developed the game, well, I think the biggest challenge that any game developer is going to face is being able to objectively decide whether or not their game is actually fun. Yeah. When you first started off, you're kind of writing things down on paper, and you're like, yeah, I think this, like, it sounds fun, it's going to be cool, and you start building it, and you kind of really have to discover the identity of your game, what it is that's great about it, and how you can push that to 11. So for us, it was going to shows and trying, like, learning that you need to find people who are better at the game than you are, who get the game more than you do, and then kind of follow those people. Once you find your audience, that there is an interest in the game and how they play, it's about prioritizing their opinions over the people that don't get it. And I think the mistake that a lot of people make is kind of listening to everybody, or at least too many people. And in our case, once we found a guy who were like, you know what, this guy gets the game. I just asked him, I'm like, do you have like an hour? And just asked him every question I could possibly think of to try and get a sense of how I could make the game better for that person. So that was definitely one of the challenges for us. Like, you get too close to something and it's hard to tell if it's fun, because you play it every day.
And so you found a lot of these trade shows or PAX, for instance, to be really important to the game development process.
Yeah. A lot of developers, I think, are really good too, because they have, some people have it and some people don't. And it's not a negative thing, but some people have, game developers tend to have a sense of imagination where they can see something that's really rough and picture what it's going to be. And so their criticisms are really, really valuable. Whereas on occasion you'll run across people that don't have that sense of imagination, and they can't get past the limitations of what they're seeing. Which is fine, right? Like I said, it's not good or bad. It's just for games development, one is definitely more useful than the other.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, like definitely for me, going to conferences was helpful. Meeting other developers, we went to a couple showcases at GDC, um, and at the Mix, we ended up talking to a bunch of people that were really helpful. I met uh, Johannes from formerly from Red Links. Now he's at oh god, I'm gonna forget. It's gonna make me feel really
It's okay.
Badlands is the name of their new game.
Yeah.
Um, but he was actually he was one of the developers on Trials and was hugely helpful. Like he came by, played the game, and gave me a bunch of critiques and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which was really helpful. Yeah, like people like that are just invaluable, right?
Indeed. I don't know if you remember any of them, but what was one of the biggest suggestions you received and maybe you implemented into the game? Do you remember any?
Yeah, I mean, definitely one of the biggest ones was at that first GDC that we brought the game to. So, like I said, I was talking to Johannes from Red Links, and I also talked to one of the developers of Resogun, and both of them actually said the same thing. At the time, if you flew off screen, your character would just kind of die.
Yeah.
And both of them said, "Oh, I was expecting when I went off one side to pop onto the other." And I was like, "Yeah, like why wouldn't we think that was a great idea to do? Like, sure, it doesn't really make any sense, but like for gameplay, it just opens up so many possibilities." So we tried it and loved it, and we're like, "Yeah, okay, this is great." It just like adds this other opportunity when you're kind of stuck in an oh crap moment to kind of get out of the way.
That's very cool. Another thing I heard that people compliment about this game is the soundtrack itself. Can you describe a little bit of how that came into fruition?
Yeah, so we were just extremely lucky. We worked with a composer called Giancarlo Feltrin, and he was a sound guy who worked just down the hall from us. And he does a lot of movie soundtracks and commercial scoring and stuff like that. And yeah, like we were always talking to him day by day, but we never actually worked with him directly. And so when we were putting together a prototype for GDC, I said to Alex, I'm like, well, we should get at least one piece of music, that we can start with, so it looks more professional. And asked Giancarlo if he'd be interested, and he said, yeah, sure, I can do that. That's no problem. And he put together this piece of music super quick, which ended up being the main theme from the soundtrack. And when we heard it, we're just like, this fits so perfectly. I remember saying to Alex, I'm like, okay, we have to make an entire album. Like, we have to find the money to do it. And yeah, so we ended up making like it's like 25 minutes long, the album. So
That's crazy.
we made quite a bit of music, and yeah, all of it is just great in my opinion.
That's awesome.
Couldn't have been happier with that. And it's weird because usually our experience is the opposite, where you hire a bunch of people and finally you find one that you're happy with. But in this case, it was just like perfect right out of the gate.
Very interesting. And then maybe this is more of a question about the studio in general, along with the game. What do you think is maybe unique about the way PixelNAUTS creates games versus maybe other studios, or something that distinguishes the studio amongst other competitors, I guess, is another way to put it?
One of the things when we started our company that we were dedicated to maintaining was not to ever take ourselves too seriously. I find that like when you deal with, well, like playing a lot of other games, they can kind of fall victim to too serious of a tone. And without like looking back at some of those movies that inspired us to make this game, they all kind of have the full spectrum of comedy to tragedy, or comedy to horror, comedy to action, or whatever. And I find that when you have both the ends of human emotion, the highs and the lows become they hit you a lot harder, and they seem to matter a lot more. The characters feel more relatable, and everything to do with the story is just better. So that's one thing we wanted to just stay away from was just having that like grizzled, hard-boiled tone that has no sense of humor to it at all. So I think that's definitely something that is indicative of our studio. Like if one of us comes up with a joke, we're like, yeah, that's great, that's going in the game. It's never a matter of like, it doesn't really like fit the tone of our game, or it's like, oh, I want it to be more serious. Like we're into entertainment. We want
Hmm.
people to laugh and have a good time. Um, I definitely say one of the other things too is we always love when we play games, having conversations about them, and especially when one of us has a different experience with a game than the other ones did.
Mm.
Um, so a lot of the times when we're making a game, we'll hide little things all over the place that are kind of unique
Mm.
that most people won't find. But just so that, the person who's really obsessed with the game, plays it a lot, might have a slightly different experience than another person. And then when they're talking about it over the water cooler, that difference kind of makes it feel like there's a deeper world than there actually is.
Mm.
So we definitely put a lot of value on that too. We usually spend the last month or two just like stuffing extra content in, jokes and hidden things. So
Do you have an example of that, but out of curiosity, that you don't mind
I'm
revealing?
not going to tell you anything.
Ah, all right, all right.
No, it's like it just you have to find them. That's the whole point of it.
Mm,
So
that's very cool.
yeah.
Um, as I'm going through this right now, I noticed a couple of things, which is um, there's a lot of upgrades in the system, and there's a lot of collectibles. I, sorry, I was trying to think and play at the same time here. It's confusing me. Um, uh, can you describe a little bit of how you came up with the upgrade system and how the gameplay evolved maybe throughout the whole development process?
Yeah, that's no problem. I should probably just give you a brief overview of the game to begin with too.
Sure.
So in Lost Orbit, you play as Harrison. You're kind of a maintenance worker who gets stranded in deep space after a ship is destroyed by a mysterious anomaly.
Mm.
And you make the decision to kind of leave your safe little shelter of this space relay and try to make the trip across 4 solar systems back to your home planet alone. And all you really have is your jetpack. Um, so that's basically the premise: is you're trying to get through these areas as fast as possible and rejoin your civilization without, smushing yourself on a rock somewhere,
Mm.
which you're probably going to do. Um, Along the way, you kind of come in contact with this alien space probe who you can see following you now. And he takes pity on you and tries to come along with you and help you on your journey and keep your morale up and help you craft equipment to better equip you for your way back home. But he kind of understands that you're pretty much doomed, and so he's a bit sarcastic and a bit cold with you. But yeah, he's just trying to keep your hopes up until you die, and then he can be on his way.
Very gloomy, but again, the inspiration I can tell it's coming shining through.
Yeah.
Another thing I was really just a random observation. The death animation is very bloody. Is there a reason? Because I don't know. I thought it was really fascinating that this is such a cute character, and yet the death was so grisly. Like I'll do it right now. I was just really surprised. Is there a reason why that happened? A reason you wanted that to happen like that?
Yeah, it was kind of on purpose, and it's twofold. So first and foremost, we kind of wanted you to feel a bit more for this character who's stranded out in deep space,
Mm.
and the decision to go with insta death when you hit anything
Hmm.
is kind of a product of that. Like it makes the game feel a lot faster, but it also makes you feel a lot more vulnerable, and having that cute aesthetic with it too. We find people tend to relate a little bit to the character. They pop in, they're just like, oh, he's cute. This is cool. I'm just kind of floating through space. And then the first time they hit something and get that kind of visceral death sequence, it's a lot more extreme in the tonal shift. So I think people react a little bit more to it, and they kind of like feel a little bit more for this cute character that they liked that just got smashed all over a rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the second part is definitely a product of the fact that the game kept getting faster and faster.
Mm.
Was that the feeling that the more there is at stake with the insta deaths, the faster you feel like you're actually going when you're doing well.
Mm.
Like the fact that one tiny little mistake and you're toast makes the game feel a lot faster than it is. Was definitely a product of us seeing that people liked going fast.
Hmm. And going off of that, then, was speedrunning a definite foundation of when you were making the game, like something that you wanted to encourage people to do?
Yeah, when we started, we knew we wanted to go through it quickly, but we didn't realize how quickly other people would want to go through it. So to begin with, there was only one tier of boost, You just kind of had a booster that you used periodically to kind of avoid obstacles.
Mm.
And we found after a very short period of time that we were never releasing that button. And so it wasn't long before we made that unlimited.
Mm.
And then there was this kind of ongoing joke around the office that every couple of weeks, like somebody would look up after playing and be like, "Does this game feel slow to you guys?" Like, and every time we brought it to a show, that was kind of reinforced by the reactions of the players who really liked it. Was saying like, "Oh, I just love the speed of the game," and so we kind of kept making it a little bit faster at a time, and ended up with a 2-tier boost. So there's your regular standard booster, which people tend not to ever let go of, and then there's the mega booster, which is kind of just a little bit too fast to be safe, which
Yeah.
was the and as you progress and collect these crystals, which are called obtainium, you're able to upgrade your kit, and one of the things that you can upgrade is your jetpack, so that you can go faster still.
Mm. That's very cool. What was I gonna say? So many questions, so little time here. Let me see. I guess another question just coming out of the progression system a little bit is, or not that even, just going back to the speed running. Do you watch other speedrunners? Are you surprised by anyone that has completed the game in such a quick amount of time that you've observed?
Yeah, there's been some interesting moments watching people play the game, doing things that well, okay, I'll just give you an example. One of the shows that we went to PlayStation Experience in Las Vegas,
Mm.
and I had a guy come up and play the game, and one of the power-ups that you can unlock is a barrel roll,
Yeah.
and that's on the shoulder buttons and allows you to just kind of strafe side to side at the click of a button. And typically, the way you'll see people play is the right trigger is your mega booster, so they'll have their finger on that, and then when they get into an emergency situation, they'll pop over to the barrel rolls and kind of dodge out of the way.
Mm.
Well, we had a guy come and play, and he played it probably differently than anyone else I've ever seen play it. So what he would do is he would hold down the trigger for Mega Boost constantly with his middle finger,
Okay.
and then he'd have his index fingers on the barrel rolls at all times, and that was pretty much the only way that he steered. So he would just fly through the game super fast, strafing left and right to try and get through. And so he was getting amazing times.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of blown away by it at the time. And he had to go into the menu a couple times to, fine tune his barrel roll distance. But once he got it the way he liked it, he was actually like quite competitive for not ever actually using the steering mechanic. Had another guy also at PlayStation Experience who played. He actually only had use of one arm.
Oh wow.
And came up, and I was like, I hadn't really thought about that, but you can try, but I'm not sure how easy it's going to be to play. And he basically balanced the controller on his other arm and would use his thumb as the joystick,
Okay.
and then his fingers to control all of the additional buttons.
Oh wow.
And actually did quite well considering he only had use of one hand. So I was really impressed by that too. But yeah, watching the videos, there's pretty routinely stuff that I find really impressive. And I'm like, wow, this person's better than me at this game.
And I guess that's a evolution of how streaming technology has come along, Twitch and YouTube gaming, for instance. Has that become a big impact, I guess, on game development, do you think, or is it just more of something that is a product of, what you observe, I guess, is what I'm trying to say?
No, I think it's great. I think it's definitely helpful. A lot of people, will ask you kind of cautiously, do you mind if I stream this, or is it okay if I use the music or something like that? And to me, it's anything that gets the game out there and gets more eyes on it is great. And like I said, watching people who are better than you at the game is kind of the ultimate reward as a game developer. As we were going through developing it, we kind of tried to make things to keep as many options open as possible. So like you'll notice in the rock formations, there's a lot of tiny gaps. And later on, when you get into the later levels, it becomes more important. But there's all sorts of routes that I wouldn't have even imagined when we were working on the levels that people have come up with. And I like that kind of emergent gameplay where people can find out, ways to be to be better than the designer intended.
Yeah.
Because it keeps the longevity of the game going.
Mm. So you're saying you don't mind people finding glitches or little key
Not at all.
strategies? Mm.
No, I think some of the best things we've ever gotten in games have been from glitches. Like,
Mm.
for example, rocket jump.
Yeah.
Like if you play any Team Fortress,
Mm.
the soldier's whole thing is the rocket jump, which is basically an accident from knockback in
Yeah.
Quake back in the day. But they just embrace it and go with it, and it makes the game that much better.
Hmm. And speaking of Team Fortress, I think if I remember reading correctly, you are a big fan of Team Fortress and Counter-Strike. Is that correct?
Love it. Yeah. Yeah, Team Fortress
yeah.
is great. It's one of those games too that you can keep coming back to. I remember my friend saying to me, "Oh, you're still playing this game after 2 years? Like, what's the appeal?" And I'm like, "You know what? Come play, and you'll see, right?" And this was right after the all the weird sci-fi updates, and he hadn't seen any of the melee weapons, or it's just crazy how much they've changed that game. And I'm reminded of it every time I have to install it from scratch now, when it's like, oh, I remember when this game was 1.5 gigs, and now it's like 14 gigs
Yeah.
content, first party content, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, that game's super fun. I love the tone of it. I just love everything about it.
Very cool. And a question from the chat and, in general, what else do you game nowadays, or what are some of your favorite games in general?
I play a lot of different types of things. Recently, there's definitely a certain place in my heart for just like small, downloadable, like weird idea games, and also competitive, like couch multiplayer games. So we've been playing a lot of Duck Game at work, and it's gotten aggressively competitive. But that's kind of replaced Bomberman
Yeah.
recently.
Okay.
What else? I've been playing Keep Talking and No One Explodes, which is actually pretty awesome too. I love asymmetrical gameplay.
Yeah.
What else? I love racing games, which should be no surprise because it's kind of like a space racer.
Yeah.
So I've been playing Grid Autosport and some Dirt as well. But yeah, like AAA games are awesome too. Very excited about Fallout. Looks great. Battlefront as well. We were playing the beta, so that game looks unbelievable in my opinion. Like watching it, it's just it's a bigger leap in graphics fidelity than I've seen in a long time in games. And just some simple things like really aggressively going after aliasing, just the fidelity of textures, the quality streaming that you can get with it, like it's gorgeous. And even just the sound effect, like that they actually got the sound effects library from LucasArts or Disney now.
Yeah.
That they actually, like, all the effects actually look like 70s retro effects, like sparks, more than like glowy Unreal kind of effects. Just adds to it, makes it feel like you're actually in the movies. Yeah, that game is awesome. I mean, one of my favorite games from a long time ago was Battlefield 1942. So any of those types of games, Battlefield or Battlefront games, are all awesome in my opinion.
You have a very it seems like you have not a lot of time, but you engage a lot with games. Do you think that's an important trait for a game developer, or do you think that's approached differently, game developer to game developer?
I think it's important to me. I know game developers who say they don't play games. And I know game developers who say, like, if you don't play games, you have no business in the industry. But I think there's successful game developers who look at it exclusively as a business and plan their game based on what's popular and structure their project based on what revenue model is going to make them the most money. But that's not how we do things. So I mean, you depending on who you are and how you look at that, it's either foolish or loyal. But no, we love games. We love all sorts of different kinds of games. And so, for us, if we're working on something that we don't want to play ourselves, it's kind of a hollow existence. Like, if I wanted to just make money, I could, there's several other jobs I could get that would be boring as hell, but raking in a lot of cash, right? So yeah, for us, it's kind of trying to find that balance, I guess, where we're not starving artists, but we're not, you know, we're not selling out just to make Candy Crush or whatever.
And that is the hard balance, is it not? In creating, a game that you really love and enjoying the art, but also making the money as well.
Yeah, there was this great quote from, I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was somebody at LucasArts or
Hmm.
Lucasfilm, and the quote was, "Films aren't released; they escape."
Hmm.
And what he was this is a post effects guy, and what I think he was trying to say was that as a effects artist, there's always more that you can do,
Hmm.
and it's I feel the same way as an artist working on games. We're both the co-founders are background artists by trade, and there's always something more we feel we can do to make the game more fun, look better,
Hmm.
what have you. But at some point, somebody has to step in and say, "Okay, listen, ship it." There's no point in working on something for another 10 years when you have no idea what the audience reception is going to be in the first place, right?
Hmm.
So, yeah, we try and balance the business and the passionate side of making games. It's definitely hard.
I see, I see. What would you suggest to people that whether they're an indie developer or an aspiring game developer, if they wanted to enter the industry for the first time, what would you suggest to them? Or what tips would you give them, I guess, is a better
Enter
question.
the industry in terms of like making their own game or like getting a job at
Making their own games, I think.
making their own games. Okay. Oh, there's so much advice. I guess the biggest thing is the keep it simple side of things.
Mhm.
The inclination when you get a bunch of friends together to make a game for the first time um, is the wouldn't it be cool if talks,
Mhm.
which are great, and you have to have that. You got to have that passion for games development, but at some point, you have to stop coming up with ideas and start actually putting rubber to road and getting something done.
Mm.
And that's not to say that during the production, probably during the production, you're going to come up with a mechanic or an idea that's better than anything else you have in the game.
Mm.
And you should aggressively pursue those, but you can't afford to aggressively pursue every idea because you'll end up with a bunch of half-done garbage.
Mm.
So yeah, my advice would be like pick something simple and finish it. And that, to me, a finished, 5 out of 10 game is way more impressive than somebody with a not nearly finished. The way they explain it, it's a 10 out of 10, but it's never going to see the light of day. No one's ever going to play it.
Mm.
So just finishing things is key. Usually, the first game that people make would be, in post-secondary or in high school with a bunch of friends,
Mm.
and you're going to run into all the issues of game development, like who's in charge, how do you resolve conflicts, what do you do when somebody flakes out,
Mm.
all these kind of goodies that you have to work through to be able to actually have a good games development team.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really valuable experience. Like all the botched final projects in university
Mm.
are like it's like a rite of passage for you to understand how a game is made and why, things are done the way they are done.
As they
Um,
say, like you have to fail a little bit in order to succeed, I guess, is the
Definitely.
yeah
And
quote.
yeah, you almost can't be afraid of failure, right? Like,
Mm.
there's going to be a time at which point, yeah, if you keep failing, you're going to be out of business. But when you're working on something, some people want to, shelter it and cradle it like it's a little baby and never show it to anyone until it's absolutely perfect. Well, it's never going to be perfect. So for us, showing the game to people, watching how they play, and actually, I mean, like I was saying earlier, you need to identify your audience, and those are the people that you want to listen to. You don't want to listen to everybody.
Mm.
But on the alternate side, there's developers who somebody will tell them a realistic criticism of their work,
Mm.
and they'll just absolutely refuse to acknowledge it or consider it valid, and that's a huge mistake too.
Mm.
There may be reasons for why you chose to do something a certain way, and those reasons, like you might not be able to change it. and have your game, be better or maintain its integrity. But that doesn't mean that the criticism's not valid, right? Like, so
Hmm.
for example, if you make a student film and somebody's like, wow, the actors are terrible, and you say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I only had $10 to hire actors, and shut up, leave me alone. Yeah, okay, maybe you only had $10, but the person who's going to see the film doesn't really care how much money you had, right? So there's
Mm.
all these bits of adversity that you're going to face, and all you can really do is try and get the best product out of the circumstances that you find yourself in.
Mm.
So yeah, like, learn to take criticism well.
Yeah.
Learn to figure out who isn't a part of your target audience,
Yeah.
and just kind of don't get too hurt about that stuff. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, the best game in the world, there's people who hate it, and it seems to be the more famous or the more popular you are, the more people are just going to hate you for no reason.
Mm.
But I don't know, it can be kind of funny at the same time.
Yeah.
You get like 10 positive comments on social media or on YouTube or what have you,
Hmm.
and you get one negative comment, and the inclination is to take that one to heart. But I don't know. For me, when I see somebody play the game and they're sincerely having a good time, that's
Yeah.
the best feeling. And when I see somebody struggling with the game, that's pretty much the worst feeling.
Mm.
But I try and just focus on the positive.
A couple of questions from the Twitch chat. Number one, and maybe a bigger question, is what's next for PixelNauts? And the question also is, will you guys be at this year's PlayStation experience?
So we are working on the next title. It's unannounced. We've been working on it for, let me think, probably about 4 months now.
Okay.
We're just kind of getting to the point now where it has the bare minimum to be considered a game,
Mm.
i.e., like, you have a life, you can die, there's a goal.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't really said anything about that, and I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail right now, because I want to get it to a point where people get the idea of it the second I talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's something that's still kind of in development. But what I can say is that all the principles that we put into Lost Orbit,
Mm-hmm.
we're continuing to put into this game. So same sense of fast-paced action,
Uh-huh.
same great controls that you have in this game, where you're never locked into a specific movement or whatever. You can always interrupt your movements, kind of like a fighting game.
Mm.
And same ability to upgrade your character and kind of play the way that you want to play. All those attributes are still are going to be in the game as well. Obviously, yeah, like a bunch of the setting and the goals and some of the art style and stuff like that is going to change. But I'm super excited to talk about it. I don't want to go.
You don't want to
through
spoil too much.
Yeah.
No, but
Well,
it's
not even
yeah.
a matter of like necessarily spoiling it. It's just
Mhm.
like, I know how much better it's going to be if I have everything ready to really to give people an idea of what the game's going to be about.
No, we're really excited to hear about it, more about it.
Yeah.
Um,
And as far as PlayStation experience,
Mhm.
I'm not sure if we'll be there or not. We'll have to see what stage the game is at.
all right, that's very, very
But
cool.
yeah, I'd love to. I actually had a great time at that event. I thought it was really well put together.
Very, very nice. We'll keep an eye out for your next game for sure. And one more. That's a funny question. Is it coming out before the next Last Guardian? Uh, um, let us see. Another question about Lost Orbit. Considering, let me repeat the question verbatim in case I get it wrong. Considering the screen warp mechanic of the game, was it ever considered to have the ship always in the middle and have the level wrap around instead? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess the way that would be visualized would be something like you're on a cylinder and you're just kind of moving along the cylinder.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, because we kind of added the mechanic after building a lot of the levels, it wasn't really something that we talked about. But we did. There was one point where we kind of sat there and thought about, like, what is this mechanic actually in physical space? And I think the closest thing we considered was, yeah, it's like a cylinder, or I think F-Zero had some levels where you were on, kind of a tube of some sort, and you could go around the outsides of it. So something like that. But yeah, we just kind of let it go as um, Probe, who's your companion, was just kind of transwarping you through space and kind of like keeping you on track on your way back to your home planet. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
awesome. Very, very cool.
yeah.
And I guess to any of your fans that are watching and to anyone that supported your games, and do you have anything you'd like to say to them or um, yeah, anything you'd like to say and just to wrap everything up?
The game's available on PS4 and Steam. All of your videos of your playthroughs are uploaded to the internet. You can view everyone's playthroughs and stuff like that. So if you're really into competitive, arcadey, fast-paced dodge 'em up action, then definitely check it out. Yeah, we'll probably be announcing our next game um, midpoint sometime next year. So yeah, if you like what you see too, keep your eyes out. Um, you can follow us on Twitter as well. It's at PixelNAUTS Games and at PixelNAUTS Chris for updates. Check us out on Facebook. Check out our webpage and whatever. And also, I'll hang around for a bit too. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to ask me, and I'll do my best to answer.
That's very cool. Well, Chris, I'm gonna really quick see if I can get to the end of the stage, and then I'm going to call it a wrap. Thank you so much for. I just, of course, I die. No, thank you so much for coming to talk with us. This game is very, very fun. I love speedy games. I love racing games. So this is right up my alley, personally.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No worries. We're gonna end it right there, on that death, which is very sad. But again, everybody, Chris will be on for a little longer after this, and hang tight. We'll choose a winner, 3 winners for copies of this game on Steam. So hang tight. I will choose those winners right after we end the stream. So you can look for the archive of the stream on our YouTube page. We'll tweet it out. We'll tweet it to Chris and his team so they have it as well. And yeah, thank you guys as always for watching. We really, really appreciate your support. And we'll be back next week, same time, same place. Until then, see you guys next week.